Okay, so following the um, explanation of this sort of second level of TGfU for the coaches, moved on to the sharp end of the workshop, which was where we were going to look at the notions of developing effective condition games for young football players, and also applying a questioning pedagogical approach. So we began by looking at the sort of well-known four pedagogical principles of TGfU: sampling, tactical complexity, representation, exaggeration. But for the purpose of the workshop, I sort of ignored the sampling and exaggeration, mainly because sampling would not be relevant outside of a multi-sport context, and exaggeration, I don't know, almost arbitrarily, but given that the exaggeration of principle in games is normally more useful for things like making repetitive techniques occur in games and such like. I thought I would just concentrate on the middle two, tactical complexity and representation, because they're obviously connected. So I suggested that these were related concepts and that they were really useful when doing game-based sessions with young children. So to start with tactical complexity, this is basically the idea that you're going to manipulate, as a teacher or as a coach, you're going to manipulate task constraints, you're going to manipulate the nature of the game so that it meets the level of the learners. Now, that's a sort of fairly simple way of saying that the game has to, children need to be able to experience success in the game, and it has to be sufficiently simple for them to play easily, quickly, and experience success. Now, if you take you back a couple of slides, one way we can reduce tactical complexity is by reducing the number of tactical problems they have to face. So if you want to take away, for example, progressing the ball and penetration scoring, you play a game that doesn't have a goal and that isn't directional, so it's just purely possession. So you change the task to simplify to the level of the learner, and often, particularly working with young children, so these coaches were working with 5-6-year-olds sometimes, that has to be quite significant. So, but having said that, representation is also important. So this is the principle that modified games should contain the same tactical structure, so the same basic goals or rules as the adult version of the game. So they should represent the real thing. So it's something we have to balance these two things off. We need to simplify the game, we need to reduce tactical complexity, but without losing its representativeness to the real thing. So it was this sort of balancing act that I wanted to explore with the coaches in the session. And we did that outside, and we basically went through some games that they would normally do, and we tried to think about how we could reduce tactical complexity further without losing representation. So we explored that in the practical element following this lecture. I tried to sum that up with the coaches by basically pulling it together in 3 simple questions or principles. So the first thing is, does it look like football? So does the game that you're playing look like an invasion game? Does it look like football in some way? Would somebody from the outside come in and recognise it? Does it resemble the real thing? Second, is it sufficiently simple to be understood by the participants? So, when they look at the game happening, does everybody understand what's going on? And do they understand why they're playing this game? Is the crucial thing, and that takes you on to questions which we'll come into in a moment. And then third, I asked them to think about, can everybody do it? So does the game offer lots of opportunities to try out solutions to the problem, or to experience success for all participants? So I suppose the first question is, can everybody do it? So as you look at the game, is everybody exploring the problem? Is everybody engaged in problem-solving activity? And then the second question is, could they do it more often? So could you change the game, again by tweaking the space, the time or the task, the equipment or the participants, so that they have to do that more often. So again, we talked through some examples of that, and we looked at that out on the field after the workshop. So in terms of tactical complexity and representation, those were the things that we were interested in, and that's how we summarised it. The second thing that they wanted to take from the workshop, or the third learning outcome, was to do with questions, and how do we go about asking questions to complement this approach? So once we have the right game, how do we lead the children through it? And people have often heard the phrase, and the coaches laughed when I mentioned this, people have heard the phrase, the game is the teacher. Now that's sort of true to an extent with TGfU, because a really well devised game that's sufficiently simple or sufficiently complex, that has lots of opportunities to succeed and really engages the players in problem solving. They will get lots of opportunities to play and to make mistakes and learn from that in a very naturalistic way. But we can do a lot to facilitate that process, and that's what part of the coach's job. So I suggested to the guys that effective questioning, or there was we could talk about a methodology for effective questioning. And again, if you look at the research on questions, not that there's a huge amount, but what you ultimately get is something that looks a little bit like this. So I call this the 6 Ps. So it's a kind of stage methodology or process for asking questions. So first of all, purpose. So we ask ourselves, is the question connected to the purpose of the session? So is the question relevant to the learning outcome or the aim? So that's got to be clear before we even ask a question. Second is prime. So I think it's best when questions aren't a surprise. So it's good to ask a question and not expect an answer immediately, and just let them play. So part 2 will be asking the question, but in a way that you didn't expect an immediate answer. So you'd say, this is the question, I want you to go away and play and explore that for a moment. So it's really the purpose of this priming question is to focus their attention on the tactical problem in the game. And then you play. So third point is play or perform. And when you play, I guess the job of the coach is to remind and reinforce. So remind the players of the questions they're playing and reinforce. And also to identify a teachable moment. So we don't want to break out of play constantly, the old stop, stand still stuff. We want to let them play, but we also want to be able to identify a point in time which is good to step in and pause and rephrase the question. So a good teachable moment might be, for example, a player really doing the thing that you want them to do. So if the game is about possession and keeping possession of the ball, you might see a player receive it, protect it, dribble a little bit, and then lay it off. In order to keep the ball. So you might pause at that moment and say, right, what just happened, and really focus on a positive performance. Fourth, we would then ask the question again. So again, this has to be clear, unambiguous. So you might want to think about how you phrase the question, the simplest possible form of words that you could use, and also making sure the question's at the right cognitive level for the participants. And then making sure everybody's got an equal chance to respond. So how we invite feedback is important here. Again, typically coaches ask questions to a group en masse and then wonder why they're not getting a response. And it's usually just because that's a fairly intimidating way of inviting a response. So we talked about having small groups, letting them have 30 seconds to go away and talk and then come back and offer a group response rather than an individual response. Fifth, probe. So we're not just going to take the first answer. We want to get into it. So we want to give some thinking time first. So not forcing an immediate response. And when the players are responding, to be actively listening. So making sure that we're nodding, agreeing, making noises to show that we're listening, and then recapping the responses that you're getting and reinforcing the answers that you want to take forward. So then the sixth point would be progress. So to have in mind what the next question might be, or what the next game might be. So that basic methodology, I think, I suggested to coaches that could form the basis of half a session, or maybe even a whole session you could do based on that 6-stage process. And one of the tools that I gave the guys in the session, if I just flick out of this, was a question planner. So again, I gave them this is basically a little sheet that I gave them, and we used to they write their own responses in, and it's got prompts. So purpose, what's the purpose of the session, and that sort of implies that they know where they've been and that they know where they're going. So there's a curriculum, that they know whereabouts they are in that curriculum. Prime, we talked about, again, what question are we going to ask, what's the purpose of the question, what's the simplest form of words, what's the cognitive level. So were we talking sort of basic memory questions, can they remember what they did last week, or are we talking analytical questions, can they analyse a period of play and say what happened and what went right, what went wrong. So different cognitive level of questioning might be going on. Playing, so we prompt the guys on how would they remind during the activity, so getting involved and asking the question again and pointing things out, but as the play's going on concurrently. Presenting and probing, so again looking at different ways of making sure we get equal responses or equal opportunity for response, thinking about what sort of responses they might expect to receive, what sort of an answer they want to lead the players towards. Now, you may not want to lead them towards an answer, but often coaches do have an answer in their head that they want to lead people towards, and the idea would be that you would collect the feedback and synthesize it in such a way that it would end up leading towards that particular answer. And then again in progression, we talked about thinking back to an annual plan or curriculum, and also thinking about differentiation. If we're going to progress the activity, it doesn't need to progress in the same way for everybody, or could we think about progressing it in different ways for different people? So we went outside and we got the coaches to basically follow this methodology by writing their own responses into these boxes and then following it through and seeing how they go along with it. But this is quite hard to do. It's not something that everybody's going to get straight away. But I think if you keep these 6 P's in mind, even if you only cover a few, it's better than just surprising people with a random question here and there. So that was it for the workshop. We went outside and we tested this stuff out, and I guess it was somewhat effective. The feedback was generally pretty good, and I'm interested to see how the coaches got on with this and how they get on with it, applying it to their practice on a day-to-day level. Okay,